Let's go live to foreign editor at The Australian, Greg Sheridan. Greg, this saga coming to a close after nearly a decade and a half. The Assange saga, and he's on his way home, accompanied by the High Commissioner to the UK, Stephen Smith, on board that plane.
Yes, Kieran. So I think it's a common sense solution that he pleads guilty and is allowed out on the basis of time served. But you know, all those folks on the streets of Melbourne, everything they said, they got the facts wrong, which I think demonstrates, you know, how the media has made a folk hero of Julian Assange, irrespective of the facts. It's important to remember a few things. All the years he spent in the Ecuadorian embassy were his choice because he refused to answer rape charges in Sweden. Now, as I understood it in the Me Too age, you're supposed to answer rape charges. And I don't think anyone has seriously argued that the Swedish women, I'm not saying he was guilty of those charges, not for a second, but I don't think anyone can seriously argue that the Swedish women who brought those charges were part of an international CIA plot to persecute Julian Assange. So years and years and years of this saga have been his choice to refuse to answer rape charges. Now, Sweden is generally a country to the left of Britain and would have been less likely to extradite him to the US than Britain was. And then secondly, there is a tremendous seriousness in what Julian Assange initially did. People's lives were put at risk, tremendous at risk, because intelligence sources of the United States in very, very violent and dangerous countries were simply published. This is not like a responsible act of journalism. Having said all that, it's a great thing. It's a common sense solution. He's certainly been incarcerated more than long enough. And so I think he pleads guilty and he is a convicted felon, therefore, if this goes ahead, and he gets out on the basis of time served. But I think we ought to be a bit careful about turning him into a national saint or the living embodiment of the spirit of Farlap or something.
Well, there's certainly been a bipartisanship on this issue in the latter part of the saga, with representations made to Congress, but also from the Prime Minister down, essentially, at the highest levels, with President Biden too. Repeated representations made across the US system, and that diplomacy has worked, Greg.
Oh, absolutely. So this is a good day for the Albanese government. I think, you know, the Albanese government has done some pretty good things in the last week or two. It's reappointed Mike Burgess as ASIO Director General after all that insane criticism of him by Paul Keating. So that's a pretty good action in the intelligence space, and it's lobbied quite sensibly, but with very restricted language and so on. And the United States is not conceding here that it has done anything wrong. And indeed, all it has done is apply for the extradition of Julian Assange. You see, one of your Vox Pop folks in Melbourne said, why didn't they charge him properly instead of just throwing him into jail? Well, they were trying to charge him properly and he wouldn't answer the charges. Well, that's fair enough. He's perfectly entitled to, you know, pursue his legal rights to fight extradition. But I think the Albanese government has got the tone on this pretty right. It's just said that the thing has gone on too long and it hasn't engaged in any sort of anti-American rhetoric, and it hasn't valorised Julian Assange. So I'm very glad that he's free, and that's a wonderful thing and all the rest of it. But let's not make this into an Australian sainthood, because there's just no evidence that, those people in Afghanistan who risked their lives to cooperate with the Americans and were exposed in WikiLeaks publications, they didn't feel too great about it. And so I think this is a sober, sensible result. Well done, the Albanese government. And, all of those politicians, they also spoke very sensibly and moderately. So that's a good thing, I think.